We're continuing our series, Enemies of the Heart. And way back, believe it or not, I usually start preparing the messages that we share together about a year in advance in some cases when it gets down to the end of the year. And we talked about doing this series a couple different ways. There are 4 enemies of the heart that we're going to be talking about. And today we were going to talk about 2 of them in one time. And I just was praying a lot about it. I was kind of under conviction. And I decided, hey, no, we need to split this out. And so we're going to split them out into the original next week. So this week and next week. But today we're going to talk about one. But first I want to tell you a story. When I was in youth ministry many years ago at a little church called Hall Branch. Everybody say Hall Branch. There you go. Hall Branch Church of Christ. I was a youth minister out there, and we would get together on Friday nights with the teenagers and college-age students, and we just had a lot of fun. And one of the games that we used to play was a game called Sardines. Has anybody ever heard of Sardines? It's sort of like hide and go seek, but a little bit of a twist. So one person goes and hides, and then everybody else goes and looks for that person. But instead of saying, oh, I got you, or I found you, and making a big commotion, you secretly, quietly go and hide with them. So you got to use a little bit of strategy because maybe there's people around you. You want to make sure they don't see it. So you might see that person, but then you sneak off and then you come back. And so ultimately, you've got one person now who's going to be looking for everybody crammed into maybe a tight, uncomfortable space. It's a lot of fun, and it's hard. You're snickering, you're laughing, and crazy stuff happens. Well, every now and then, even though I was the youth minister, I would get to be the person who went and hid. And I love hiding. I love scaring my family. I'll wait around corners. I love it. It's like, if I can make people spill stuff, that's even better, right? Anybody else with me, sick and twisted like that? Okay. Some of y'all are afraid to admit it, but that's cool. So I went and I hid, and I went into this little storage room. It used to be a classroom, and there was a storage room, and there was these built-in bookcases. And up around the top of the ceiling, there was about a 2-foot gap. And so the top of this bookcase was about 8 feet tall. And so I climbed up, being the responsible, mature adult that I was, I climbed up on the furniture and got on top of the bookcase and just laid there and waited. Had the lights off, all that sort of stuff. And so the rule was you're not supposed to turn the lights on. It's in this big dark church building, and people were coming in. Some people opened the door, and they were terrified because it was a room full of big shapes and shadows, and so some of them didn't even come in. Well, a couple of guys, they were like 16, 17 years old. They walk in, and they cheated. And they flipped on the light, and I'm like, oh, great. Okay, I lose my chance here because they cheated. They never saw me. I was just above their line of sight, and they're all looking around, the light's bright. It's only like a 12 by 15-foot room, but they somehow never saw me. I just laid there. I was chilling, right? And so I was just kind of like this, Anyway, they flip the light off. They go out. A couple other people check in. They look around. They don't see anything. And then finally, those 2 guys come in. This time, for some reason, they didn't cheat. They did, the old cell phone light trick, right? And so they open the door. These 2 guys, they're walking around. They're looking. They're shining. They're like, we didn't look here last time. And they're whispering around. And this had been like 30 or 40 minutes. Normally, people get found within 15 minutes, but I'm a ninja. And so nobody found me. And so they're looking around. And so finally, I'm like, man, this has been too long. And they start looking around. And there's a closet door right by where my head is. But my head's about a foot above it. And so they open this door thinking I'm in this closet. And they shine the light. And just as they shine the light, I lean down in. I said, are you looking for me? And they said, ah! And all I could see was the light just like shaking in the dark. Ah! And they're just screaming at the top of their lungs. And I loved it. It was the best thing in the world. There was probably like a stain of stuff. I don't know what was going on. They were so shook up. Literally for like the next few minutes, they were like, their hands were shaking. They sounded like little 11-year-old girls. And they were 16, 17-year-old boys. And I love it to this day. We'll still remind each other about it. But I tell you that story for a purpose, and it's this. Sometimes the enemies of your heart will sneak up on you. Sometimes the enemies of your heart, you think, okay, I don't struggle with this, or maybe I do struggle with this one. We've talked so far about guilt. We've talked about anger. And today we're talking about one that really, truly will sneak up on you. It's so hard to perceive this one in ourselves, and it's the enemy of greed. The enemy of greed. Greed is so sneaky because have you ever met anybody who said, yeah, I'm greedy? No, nobody ever says that. People will admit if they've got anger issues. I mean, you can see all the busted windows around them. There's no way they can hide from that. Broken remote controls and all this sort of stuff. I mean, you can't hide from that to an extent. So people don't necessarily I've got an issue, most people. And some people will be honest and tell you that they, struggle with guilt. But not many people will offer up, I'm greedy. They'll say things like, I'm just careful. I'm careful. And greed can hide. The sneaky thing about greed is this. Greed will hide in good virtues. It will hide in good virtues. Things that are good for us to do, it will hide in those things. You see, greedy people can be savers. Saving is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Greedy people can be planners. And those of you who are planners love being a planner, and you don't like people who don't plan, right? They get on your nerves. But that's a good thing, but greed can hide in that. Greed also can show up, and it'll show up in this way. I'm just making my future secure. And that's a good thing, but greed can hide in that. You see, all these things are good things. And one of the things we've learned is that these enemies of the heart, they portray or they manifest themselves in the form of a phrase, a sentence that kind of talks about the relationship that's created. You see, guilt says, I owe you. So I owe you something because I hurt you. Anger says, you owe me. You took something from me, or you didn't give me something I want, so therefore I'm angry, so you owe me. Well, greed manifests itself in this way. I owe me. I owe me. And we'll see what we mean by that as we dig in a little bit deeper. You see, we will hide our greed from ourselves, but seldom do we hide it from other people. You know what I'm saying? We'll hide it from ourselves, and we won't have a clue maybe that we struggle with greed, but if you dig down deep enough and you talk to enough people that know you well enough, if you struggle with greed, chances are they've already seen it. They know it. They've picked it out. You see, when you're struggling with greed, you'll talk a lot and worry a lot about money. That's one of the symptoms. If you struggle with greed, you're probably not a cheerful giver. If you struggle with greed, you're probably reluctant to share with other people. Most of us, when we see toddlers, they don't want to share. Infants, once they start one of the first words they learn after mama is mine. They don't like to share, but some of us, we don't grow out of it. We don't like to share. Greed may show up in being a poor loser. It may show up in being a poor loser. You will sometimes quibble over insignificant sums of money. All right, now if I say that, some of y'all probably think about somebody that, they loaned you, you're at McDonald's one day and they were out of cash and they loaned you, $2.03. And you're like, yeah, I'll pay you back. And you go and you give them $2 and they're like, hey, $2.03. Anybody know anybody like that? Y'all don't hang with them kind of people? All right, cool. All right, so y'all got a different class of folks y'all hang out with. But anyway, maybe sometimes they talk about having just enough to get by, but even though that's not the case. But in their perspective, I've got just enough to get by. Maybe they struggle, if they're greedy, they struggle with being reluctant to express gratitude. Reluctant to express gratitude. Or they aren't content with what they have. Or here's another one. This one is where it gets really risky in relationships. They attempt to control people with their money. I'll give you this, but here's what I expect. Or they may not ever verbalize it, but it's the way they treat you. And then here's the thing that we got to realize. Here's why it's so sneaky. And I'm building a big case here because, as we said, most of us aren't going to look in the mirror and say, I'm greedy. And so we've got to allow the Holy Spirit to work on us. But here's one thing we have to realize, is that greed is no respecter of wealth. There are plenty of greedy rich people, and there are plenty of greedy poor people in this world. And we need to realize that. So it doesn't matter what financial situation you're in, because here's the truth. Greed is not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Greed is a heart issue. So how do you know if you have this heart problem? Most of us are hoping and praying that it's not us, right? Like we said, we can maybe admit to anger if we struggle with that. We can maybe admit to feeling guilty. Some of us feel guilty all the time. But how do we know if we're struggling with the heart problem of greed? Here's a couple of questions that you may ask. That you may ask questions when somebody's talking about needing finances or making a financial decision. You'll ask questions that make you look like a careful steward when all you're really doing is looking for an out to not be able to give. Well, that's not wise, so I'm not going to contribute to that. And you look for any little thing to say, I'm not going to give. And maybe, just maybe, there's always strings attached to your gifts. You always want some kind of, quid pro quo, where you want somebody to give back to you. I'm going to give to you, but you got to scratch my back, so to speak. Or I'm going to hold this over you, and I'm going to remind you of what I gave to you over and over and over again. And then maybe, just maybe, if people in your family and your friends don't like talking about financial issues around you, then maybe you might be struggling with guilt. Because they know you're going to blow up. They know you're going to get tense. They know you're going to make it awkward. But hold on. Some of you are probably thinking this. What's really the big deal about this? What's really the big deal about this? Because some of you may be thinking, it's not my fault that other people aren't good planners. And other people don't make good financial decisions. I look out for mine. I take care of mine. Everybody else needs to learn from me. And that's, what's the issue there? It's not my problem if they're not careful with their finances and their possessions. But here's what Jesus has to say. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Luke chapter 12, verse 15 says this. Then he, that is Jesus, said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Jesus himself, as he's teaching, says, watch out, be on your guard, because these things will sneak up on you. He said all kinds of greed, because greed does manifest itself in so many different ways. And we can be greedy and not ever realize it until it's too late. Because it's really simple to buy into the lie, like Stephen alluded to, that my stuff is my life. My stuff is my life. And so I am the sum of everything that I own. If I don't own, I'm not real, and I'm not a valuable person. So many of us as Americans struggle with that, don't we? Even if we don't have the stuff, we think I'm less than because I don't have the stuff. And like he said, I've got my iPhone and it's nice and it works perfect, but mine don't have 3 cameras on the back, y'all. I mean, can you relate? I mean, we see it and we struggle. And my TV is only 40 inches diagonal. That is wrong. This TV has lasted me 15 years, best buy I ever made. But man, I want it to break. Because I want the 60-inch, right? Because that's what I need. That's the struggle that we all have. We struggle with it. We want more, and it sneaks up on us. And Jesus said, watch out, be on your guard, because your life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Greed is so subtle, and we fall in that lie, and it's so easy to just want to protect our stuff. So, do you know what the driving force behind greed is? It's fear. The driving force behind greed is fear. Fear fuels greed. It doesn't seem natural because you're like, well, I'm taking care that I'm not worried. But really all that worry is fear. It's an endless string of what ifs. What if it gets scratched? What if it gets scratched? This is one I can admit to being a little bit of a struggle because we just got a van. It's new to us. The van's old, but it's a great van. We're thankful for it. And it had some scratches when I got it. But then I see a new scratch. I'm like, oh, come on now. I know it had another scratch, but now it's got another one, And so it's a frustration. But what if it gets scratched? What if it gets lost? You say these things. What if it's not enough? And what if I don't get my fair share? We ask these questions, and we're fueled by this fear, and it grows our greed. And greed gets lodged in our hearts when we are afraid that maybe God won't or can't take care of me the way I like to be cared for. That's important to grasp our minds and wrap our minds around. That's so important, is that deep down, when we struggle with greed, what we're thinking is maybe God can't or won't take care of me in the way that I want to be taken care of. You may say, oh yeah, see, he takes care of the birds of the field and the flowers in the field and all this sort of stuff, but they don't have a Lexus. I want a Porsche. I want the bigger house. And so God, he maybe will provide our food and he'll provide our this or that, but we don't have what we want. And so we don't trust that God is able to do it or he will do it. And so the result is this: God is so untrusted by us. We struggle, and greedy people struggle with peace with other people, and they definitely struggle with peace with themselves. They don't ever have enough, and they're never satisfied. So before we go too much further, we have to think about this. Some of us may be thinking, well, the Bible even says you need to be prepared financially. Look at Proverbs. There's a couple different places that talk about preparing for the futures in your life, whether they be known or unknown. And, you may say things like, but I'm thinking of my children's future, and I don't want them to struggle the way I've struggled. And there's so many different things that we probably all, at one time or another, have said and struggled with, but we got to dig a little bit deeper. We've got to look and see what Jesus says. He says to watch out there in verse 15. Why? Because he knew that greed is so sneaky. He knows that it will sneak in on us and get lodged in us. So look at verse 16 of chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, verse 16. It says, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Now, right then and there, we have the idea of saving coming to mind. His crops, but we can understand, money. We want to save money. He wants to know, how can I save my crops? I've got this big crop that's been produced. How do I save it? Saving's not the problem. Saving's not a bad thing. That's not the issue, so let's not cloud it and think that it is. Look at verse 18. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, and I'll build bigger ones, and I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. You see, here's the issue that Jesus is subtly pointing out in this story. The issue with this guy was not the fact that he wanted to save this excess. The issue with this guy was he never stopped to consider that God was the reason for his blessings. He never stopped to say, thank you, God, for this extra. Thank you, God, for this excess. He never even thought about that. He automatically puts the reward or the reason behind it as himself. And so many of us struggle with that. And we miss the point that God has been blessing us when we have a little, and God has been blessing us when we have a lot. And he had the idea that all of this extra was just for his own consumption. That's what he was, the angle he was taking. And you see, God does bless us with extra, but it's for a purpose. It's for a purpose. You see, Jesus used this farming analogy because, a lot of them were farmers and understood it, but who more than farmers is at the mercy of nature and God to provide for their needs? They put seed in the ground and they don't know what's going to happen. It may grow up and it may catch fire. A storm may blow it over. They never know. The seed may not grow. You just never know. And so they are at the mercy of God. And there's a point that I believe is subtly there, but we need to get it, is that all of us are like farmers and we just don't realize it. We think that we have a hand in providing for ourselves, but really God is the one who provides it all. If you work hard with your hands, he gave you the strength in your hands to work. If you work hard with your mind and your hands or whatever, any combination there, he gives it all to you. Everything you have comes from God. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of heavenly lights. And so we need to realize that we hold to God for everything. We just forget it sometimes. And so maybe this farmer should have asked this question, and we should too. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? When you have extra in your life, ask that question. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Let's practice it so we'll be ready, all right? Let's say it out loud. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Start saying that every day. And so when you have extra, whether you've already had it there waiting or you get it later on down the road, give and be ready to say, God, what do you want me to do with the extra you've given me? You see, Andy Stanley, who I try to mention every week, is the author of this book where a lot of these ideas emanate from. He shares in his book this idea. He calls what this guy struggles with and what a lot of us struggle with BBS, Bigger Barn Syndrome. Makes sense, right? We all wish we had bigger barns so we could store more of our stuff because we all want to have more stuff, and we have plenty of stuff. Even if we don't think we have a lot, we still got a lot of stuff, right? What do you notice springing up in almost every community, day after day after day? A certain type of building, a certain type of business. Storage, exactly. Storage units pop up all the time. If you're looking for a new thing to invest in, that's probably a good idea. Because here's some numbers for you. In 2018, okay, 2018, so these numbers are already a little bit dated. The storage industry produced $37 billion with a B dollars. $37 billion for the storage industry. They estimate that by 2024, which used to sound like space age, now it's really close. 2024, $49 billion is what they estimate. We're doing that. We're spending that kind of money to save our junk. To save our junk. The stuff that your kids are just hoping you get rid of before you die. For real. I mean, for real. I mean, we save all this stuff. We think that it's so valuable, so important. But we don't get rid of it. Why? Because we might need it. We might need it, right? And so we hoard it. I mean, we store it. No, we hoard it, don't we? Some of y'all, we know. My garage for a long time was almost going to be on that hoarder show. And they were going to find me if we let it go. We've got it under control a little bit better now, but they were going to find me buried in that stuff. We didn't see Bobby. We ain't seen him for 6 weeks, and it's under a pile of old Christmas decorations, ones you haven't used in 10 years, but you can't get rid of them. We hoard so many things thinking that we might need it because we do not want to let go. But here's the thing. Just like this rich man forgot to consider God when it came to his stuff, he forgot to consider God when it came to his time. And that's another part of the equation. Look in verse 20. It says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you.'" God says in this story of this man, which even though is made up, it's very real to life. He says, "You fool." He says, this very night, your life is going to be taken from you. You think you've got all this time. And we struggle with the same problem, don't we? Whether we're greedy or not, we struggle with that problem of not understanding that our time and our stuff comes from God. You see, he assumed that because of his abundance of things, that he also had an abundance of time. He had an abundance of time, but he was wrong. Even though he had an abundance of stuff, he did not have an abundance of time. And you and I have to learn that same lesson. We've got to learn this truth. Most of us will run out of time before we run out of stuff. And we need to understand this. All of us, we're all equally dependent on God for our stuff and our time. He provides it all, and he can take it all. Verse 20, part B, if you will, says this, "Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" Jesus goes on. You see, eventually everything that you and I claim to own will be owned by someone else eventually, if enough time passes. Am I right? It will be owned by somebody else. And we think that we are so powerful and we have so much, but we miss the point. Because next, here's what Jesus does. He gives us a definition of a greedy person. So here, if you're falling asleep, wake up, all right? Verse 21. "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." You see, in there, Jesus gives the definition of a greedy person, someone who is not rich toward God. I tell you what, I don't want to stand on Judgment Day and be told, "You, my friend, are not rich toward me." I don't want to hear that, and I know you don't want to either. You see, greedy can be described that way, not being rich towards God. And rich towards God can be understood as this, being ready and willing to give so that others may know God. To be rich toward God, you see, God doesn't actually need our money. He doesn't take our money and take it up into heaven, does he? We all know that. He needs us to use it here on this earth to bring him glory and bring him honor so that other people can know him. So what's the warning? Are you with me here? What's the warning that we're getting here that's all summed up in verse 21? Is it that if you don't give and you're not generous that you're going to die? No, because guess what? Everybody dies. Generous people die, greedy people die. Everybody dies. Is it going to be that your death will then all of a sudden be unexpected? No, that's not the case either. That's not the lesson either, because greedy people and rich people can die unexpectedly. You just never know. Those are not the lessons. Here's what's happening. Here's what we need to understand. The warning is this: don't waste your time on earth preparing for life and treasure that doesn't last. Prepare for heaven. Don't waste your life here on earth and your time on earth preparing for a life and treasure that does not last. Prepare yourselves for heaven. That's what God is trying to say. That's what Jesus is trying to say through the story. And he says in the words of Jesus, what he says here, he says this guy, he calls him a fool. He calls him empty-headed is what the word can mean. But see, here's something we have to realize. If this guy was a real guy, chances are a lot of us would really respect that fool, wouldn't we? Because we tend to respect the rich people around us, the people that have it more. We think that they've got everything handled the way they need it, and we think their life is better, but really they can be just as miserable as us. They may not be, but they can be just as easily because it's not a financial issue, it's a heart issue, as we've already said. McLaughlin said this, your money or your life. We know what to do when a burglar makes this demand of us, but not when God does. Isn't that sad? But it's so true. If a burglar runs up to you with a gun and you're unarmed, you can't protect yourself, and they say your money or your life, most of us are going to say, here's my money, I'll keep my life. But when God asks us that very same question almost every day, we say, no, let's keep our money. And we don't build our life for eternity. So what do we do? What do we do now that we've realized we've got a problem, or maybe we may have a problem under the surface we didn't understand? What do we do to loosen this grip that greed has on our lives? We have to ask why. We have to ask why. You see, we have no problem asking why when we're lacking, right? If you ever have a financial need, what's one of the first things you do? I mean, atheists will be praying when they need money to pay the bills, right? I mean, they're like, dear Lord, give me the money, I need something. Why don't we ask that when we've got more than enough? You know, why do I have this, God? Why do I have this extra? What can I do with it? How do you want me to use it? How can I bless other people? And there are plenty of reasons that we can come up with, and let's go over some of those really quick. Sometimes we'll say, well, I have more, so I can leave it to my children. And you know, we've all heard the horror stories of children whose lives went off the rails because their inheritance was not large enough. Right? Those are the horror stories. No, it's the other way around most of the time, right? People's lives go off the rail because their inheritance was what? Too large. Nobody's ever like struggled extra because they didn't get a big inheritance. They learn how to live and pull themselves up for the most part, or they struggle. But we often see when we leave our children or we were left with too much, it ends up making us spoiled brats, right? So that's probably not why God gives us more. I'm not saying don't take care of your family. Don't hear that. But here, it's not just to do that. Do you think it's maybe because we don't need to worry? No, because like the poet said by the name of Biggie, anybody know Biggie? He said, "Mo money, mo problems." Anybody know that? Y'all didn't know I was like that, right? I know Biggie. But it's true. The more money you have, the more problems you have. And so worry does not disappear when you have more money. Now, I mean, granted, if you don't have enough to eat, to feed your family, getting a little bit of money is going to take away some of that worry. But guess what? The more money you have, the more money you want. And so there's always an ever-growing need. Some people would say, well, I want to do an early retirement. And if you're able to do that, great. But don't think that your life is not meant to continue to serve God's kingdom, even in retirement. That just frees you up to have more time and more opportunities to serve God. And then maybe, just maybe, it's to elevate your standard of living. You see, but that's always, just like we said about what Biggie said, that's always proven to be empty past a certain point. Once you've got your needs met, more money does not necessarily make you happy for very long. It might for a little while. It'll be fun for a little while. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But it will end up being empty if you don't have your life also focused on living for eternity. There's never enough if you want more money. You see, here's the thing. Most of us, I would say, probably fall into the category of there's not enough margin in our life. And we want to do good. We've never really had a greedy thought, some of us, a lot of us probably. We don't have greedy thoughts of like, oh, I just want it more, and I don't want anybody else. We see needs and we want to meet them, but a lot of times we look at our bank balance and there's not a lot there, right? So we definitely can't give to somebody else. So what we have to understand is when the pressure's on and money's tight, if we have not left room for margin, we have little choice but to be greedy. So the struggle is real, whether it be sincere and we want to help and we can't, or we don't want to help and we're looking for excuses. But here's the thing. We've been talking about the key to defeating these things all these past few weeks, and here's what we need to understand. The key to defeating guilt is confession. The key to defeating anger is forgiveness. And the key to defeating greed is generosity. You see, whether you think you have extra or not, God is calling us to give and give generously. To give and give generously because He's given generously to us. And once we start to do that, greed will lose its grip on you. And see, to experience this, you have to give to the point that it forces you to live a little bit uncomfortably at times and adjust your lifestyle and make difficult choices. But if you want to experience what the heart of God is like in generosity, then you've got to stretch yourself so that faith can come into the picture and you trust God with everything you have. You see, if you're consuming to the point where you don't have anything left to give, greed's got a hold on you. And if you're consuming and saving to the point that you don't have anything left to give, greed has a hold on you. And so, like we said, you may feel the tension of wanting to give but not being able. So what do? You have to give before your fear disappears. I hope and pray that if you hear that, because that was me at one time in my life. I thought, okay, I'm going to pray and I'm going to say, Lord, give me the courage and the faith to give, and then I'll give. But that's not what He's saying. He says to give in faith, to step out, to give even when it's scary, and I'm going to trust you. And you're going to learn, give even when the fear is there, even before it disappears. Think about it this way. If you want to be in shape, do you wait until you get in shape to start exercising? No. It's like, dear Lord, please give me six-pack abs, and then I'll go run. You know, it's not going to work that way. You have to go run. You have to go work out, and then you'll get in shape. The same thing with giving. You have to give even when it's scary, trusting that God will provide. And then also this is going to sound counterintuitive, but give before you're cheerful. God loves a cheerful giver, it says, but give before you're cheerful, because chances are, as you're starting out and you're learning to crawl before you walk, you're not going to be cheerful about it. But the more you give and the more you see the way God uses you and blesses you from it, you're going to become cheerful. So go ahead and give before you're cheerful. And one of the ways you can do that is to become a percentage giver right off the top. Not when everything's left over, but giving to God first. Assure that God's kingdom is funded before yours is. Assure that God's kingdom is funded before yours is. And here's one of the things we have to understand. Let yourself live off the leftovers instead of God. Let yourself live off the leftovers instead of God. Now, if this is scary to you, if this is unknown to you, maybe you just say, hey, I'm going to give 2%. I'm going to give 2% off the top of my income and then try to work up. Maybe work up towards a goal of maybe 10% or 12% or wherever your faith takes you, because that's the beauty of it, is the more that we trust God and give, we become joyful and generous in it, and God blesses us. I've just seen on the news over the past couple of weeks, there's a player in the NFL, a linebacker for the New York Jets by the name of Brandon Copeland. He is living off of 10% of his income. Now, I'll give you the fact that his 10% is a lot bigger than most of our 10%. But the principle is still the same. How difficult do you think it is to be hanging out with people that give Rolexes as gifts to people, and you're deciding to live on 10% of your income? You understand the pressure that guy's putting on himself? But he's doing something for the betterment of his family. I don't know anything about his faith, but he's learning that he can live with less. He just has to sort of close his eyes and not want to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, to use an old phrase. He's learning that he can trust and he can take care of himself and he can meet more than enough of his needs. And I'm not saying that you and I can live on 10%, but we can live on a lot less than we think when we trust God. But then we also need to do this, become a spontaneous giver as well. And I will be straight up honest, Sherry, my wife, is stretching me on this. You know, things can be, we try to give and be very generous, and I've sort of come on board with that for many years now, and it's no problem for me to try to give generously. But then when we get a little bit extra every now and then, I'm like, oh, yes. And she's like, oh, it's already giving away. I mean, not that extreme, but I'm like, come on, I'm just being real. It's a struggle. And every time when I follow her example and I follow her encouragement, and we say, hey, yeah, let's give to somebody else out of this excess, every time God steps up and provides. He provides at every time. He is so amazing. Can I tell y'all a story? A couple weeks ago, you guys know that I was walking off stage early in the service and pulled me back on and said, here some people have given some gifts to honor you for Preacher Appreciation Month. And it was said, hey, look, it was supposed to be in October, but it didn't happen until November, and so it was late. It was not late. It was right on time. We had been going through a little bit of a rough patch financially. We had a lot of things that happened, and man, we were like, oh gosh, it's like, here it is, ramen noodles. Each kid gets a noodle. It's like, it's getting that bad. And we're like, we got to stretch it out for another week or two. We got to make it stretch. I don't know how it's going to happen. Multiply the fishes, right? And so we don't know how it's going to happen. And then late, right on time, some people just generously gave us something that blessed our family. And we're like, God, you're so good. Every time. It may not be in the amounts and the quantities and the timing that I want, but it's in the timing that I need. And it's in the timing that you need, and it's just what you need when you need it. God always shows up, so become a spontaneous giver as well. You see, having money is not a bad thing, and I don't want anybody to walk away with that. Having money is not a bad thing. It's not knowing why you have the money that's a bad thing. That God has put you here to bless other people. And we need to understand this last couple of ideas, that we're managers, not owners. We're managers of everything. We're not owners of anything. And that we shouldn't feel guilty when we have stuff. We should just feel responsible to help encourage and bless other people and help them get to know Jesus. So here's the summary of it all as we wrap up. When we don't understand the total lordship of Jesus, that's when we struggle the most with letting go and trusting God. So the question is Jesus Lord of your life in everything today? Is He Lord over everything? Is He Lord of all? Because what happens is when we submit to Him as Lord of all and over everything, even our finances, when we let go of greed, when we trust that He's able, you'll be free from the fear of loss that grips your heart when you're controlled by greed. You'll be free to be more concerned about helping other people not just live the best life now, but live the life for eternity. And you'll be able to fund missionaries who can go across the world and meet people and introduce them to Jesus. You'll never see this side of heaven. And you can do some amazing things. You can touch people's lives right here and right now in our community, because you're not living for your kingdom right here and right now. You're living for the kingdom that we cannot see, but one day we will all see. And so the question is Jesus Lord of all? Because it's been said many times before, if Jesus is not Lord of all, He's not Lord at all. And so today, maybe the question you have to answer is Jesus Lord of my life? One of the things we want to encourage you to do is talk about surrendering your life to Jesus. And we'd love to talk with you about that. We'll have some prayer partners. I'll be off to the side. And we'd love to share with you what that means. We'll talk about what the Bible says. And you can be baptized even today. We'd love to have you meet Jesus in the waters of baptism and begin a new life. Or maybe you just need to say, I need to talk about surrender and what that means and how do I do it and where do I start? I just don't even know. But maybe for some of you today, you have Jesus as Lord. And you just need to be reminded to say thank you. Right here up on this little half wall here, we've got some sheets of paper that you see where people wrote over the last year about things they're thankful for. We've got some slips of paper and pens all across in the middle and on the ends. And we want to encourage you during this song, during your time of worship, to just come and write something you're thankful for and stick it up here. Because maybe that's the reminder you need today, that God is able at all times and in just the right time.